Thank you so much. I might turn off the video throughout the presentation because of the quality of the audio. So please let me know if the audio breaks and I will turn off the camera. And with that, I would like to share my screen. 1 second, hopefully I can get this right with Zoom. Let me know if you can see my screen now. Looks okay?
Looks good, amazing.
Oh, okay, well, thank you very much. We are running about 10 minutes behind, but I will try to make the best use of your time today in this most awkward situations, right? In which all meetings are virtual and we are looking each other through the screen. Thank you, Ron, also for the introduction. Today, I will be speaking about optimization of clinical study planning and budgeting. And particularly, I will be focusing on how to overcome some of the challenges post-pandemic relating to the management of clinical trial business operations. I was also most inspired by Ronald's talk. Thank you, it was excellent. It's lifting us up and giving us hope in terms of what modern technology can do to clinical trials. But you would see in my presentation, I will focus on an area which is somewhat virgin territory from the point of view of technology adoption. And that is the management of clinical trial infrastructure, or everything that is business related and not so much execution related in clinical trials. So I will actually skip through my presentation since John was so nice as to introduce me. And I would like to call the first poll. Okay, I have to put my glasses for this. So my question is, in the next 6 to 12 months, what do you think will be the biggest challenges for clinical business operations teams and clinical operations team? And the choices are planning or replanning new studies, which were put on hold due to the pandemic and now are restarting. Managing the changes of scope, such as change orders. We heard a massive flow is coming. So is that a challenge at this point in time? Next one is, how about study budget management when there is no longer just a plan A? And there is intense effort on scenario planning, and does that make the budgeting season 2020 more complex? Next choice is heavy outsourcing due to aggressive study starts. When all new studies were put on hold and they will all restart at the same time, is that a challenge? And finally, is site feasibility or redoing the site feasibility on existing study a challenge? If you could please answer. Sam, I'm not exactly sure how this works.
So we'll give everyone another, I see people just still deciding.
Yes.
We'll give them another 20 seconds or so.
Yes. Maybe we made the questions too long.
Yeah, I'll give you guys 10 more seconds. Last 5. We got a lot of last second answers, and I still see people answering, so I'll give 5.
We'll give it another minute. Sorry, I guess now it's in the seconds. Okay. Okay, so most answers for planning for studies that need to restart. Not so much worried about the study budgeting and the heavy outsourcing, and looks like site feasibility and changes of scope are pretty big. Thank you so much. I'm going to close the poll now. And I wanted to open with this poll because this is really the topic of today's discussion, looking at the challenges that clinical outsourcing teams are facing post-pandemic, if we can call it post-pandemic, or during the pandemic, or the last 6 and foreseeable next 6 months. So moving on, my screen is not moving. Hold on a second. Looks like I'm frozen. Okay, I will try again. Okay, going back to our discussion, looking at the clinical business operations journey, of course, clinical trials themselves are quite a complex journey of many components. I'm focusing specifically on the vertical of the business operations. And for those who may not be using this term regularly, business operations means planning and budgeting clinical trials, doing impact analysis and scenario analysis, the entire process of sourcing clinical trials, and sourcing in a broad sense of both outsourcing and insourcing. Both elements require an element of activities related to strategy, for outsourcing, managing an RFP process, and bid due diligence in the case of outsourcing, and all of these activities leading to either internal resource estimates for in-source trials, or awarded contract for clinical vendors. And finally, the management, which is a classic activity across any industry that does heavy outsourcing, which is the management of awarded contracts. And this is looking at classic actual versus plan, knowing where your contracts are throughout the clinical trial execution journey, and constantly reforecasting not only at the total study level, but looking at the cost distribution over time, particularly now when cash is very important, cash preservation is very important. All of these areas, which are quite instrumental to pharma companies, they're usually the bread and butter of clinical outsourcing departments, are quite pristine from the point of view of technology penetration. I say that having managed outsourcing and speaking at outsourcing conferences and knowing that these core activities are being performed primarily using manual processes. There's very, very little infrastructure in place. And now the demand of performing these activities in record time at a much higher volume and scale makes this infrastructure even more obsolete, because we are talking about people and Excel spreadsheets most of the time. So with this in mind, especially when I hear discussions about artificial intelligence and machine learning and robots and self-driving cars, and you can envision actually for clinical trials that at some point they will go largely digital, then the back office of the clinical trials is unsustainably working in Excel. And the outsourcing professionals, which themselves are getting now trained on how to buy technology for clinical operation activities or data management activities, are not buying much technology for themselves. And the stress of learning new technologies and delivering faster and more reliably on outsourcing strategies and managing clinical contracts cannot be sustained by simply scaling up with labor and antiquated tools. This next slide is actually looking at some of the pain points by the numbers. Of course, these are not all the numbers. Most come from industry research and surveys that we run routinely at Strategikon. And just looking at how time-consuming these activities really are. We are talking about hundreds of hours to generate a single budget scenario. And I think all of you who are doing that, you're well familiar with the Excel spreadsheets with multiple tabs, maybe each of them containing a set of assumptions and links that can easily break. And once you are done with one budget, especially now in the pandemic time, you need to have another scenario and another scenario and compare them quickly. That is a tremendous effort on Excel, particularly for individuals who are mainly focused, or their know-how is not Excel, it's clinical operations, is understanding the inputs that go into these scenarios. RFP due diligence and the entire RFP process, very intense activity. As you all know, from the creation of the templates, which are in Word, in Excel, to the actual due diligence comparison, and the entire effort of selection, which draws resources from pharma companies, SMEs, and outsourcing professionals, and clinical operations project managers. And when we ask the questions of how many hours are spent in change order due diligence, we got a lot of countless. So I shall call that entire area a challenge because of the effort that it takes not only pharma companies to decode those change orders, but for the CROs and the vendors and the labs that have to process them in record time. So we're really in an environment which is extremely low tech, Excel dependent. As I said, I'm being lifted to hear how technology is penetrating clinical trial execution, but not penetrating enough or at all the infrastructure, business side, the non-patient side of clinical trials, which make the entire process unreliable and unscalable. I like a statistic that we got: about 56% of the sponsors base their study budget on bids alone. So they get their fair market value by doing competitive bidding. But at the same time, with that, about 80% of the sponsors feel that they are overpaying. So that is really a conflict in terms of the over-reliance and the lack of confidence in the output that is critical in outsourcing decision-making. So we've asked sponsors in various ways at events and through polls of what they feel their #1 challenge is. And if this was not a virtual conference, I would have probably asked you to raise your hand and give me your thought about the challenge. But the picture behind may be suggestive, looking at this highways and of the traffic of information that is now driven by speed. And the challenge that we perceive, especially on the infrastructure side, the sponsors are facing, is to sustain this increasing complexity with a very inefficient infrastructure. And again, on the infrastructure, I'm referring to the core non-patient related activities in clinical business operations. So it's very hard to go on these highways of speed with carts drawn by horses to make a wider a parallel. And similarly, the challenge is not only for sponsors. The CROs are feeling the pain. And we put this picture behind with the cubicles from the 80s, not because the CROs are necessarily operating in this environment, but just to show how difficult it is for the CROs to manage the sponsor-driven low infrastructure and having to match it with low infrastructure themselves. And the challenge is really on the business side is sustaining or the proposal infrastructure, the teams on the vendor side that have to put up proposals, scenarios, bids, rebids, change order reconciliation reports using a myriad of bid grids, which are unstandardized and not aligned. And that is really creating a challenge, which is overall increasing the cost of delivery for clinical services. And finally, if you look at our workforce, it's younger and younger. We are already part of the old generation. And we operate using technology day to day. So the challenge for recruiting and retaining talent, which is in the category of millennials, the heavy tech young generation, is the need to have the information at their fingertips. And that need needs to be fueled by technology. It's very hard to retain and recruit a person in outsourcing, for example, which is a very high profile department within any pharma company, and tell them that their job is to do side-by-side bid grid comparisons using Excel. So beyond the productivity, I think the motivation and the talent retention are very important when considering applying technology to those who actually buy technology. So clinical outsourcing teams. This is actually what drives me personally, drives Strategikon, and really the fuel behind our technology, which is highly disruptive. And our goal at Strategikon is really to automate key business processes through software. I have lived many of the pain points that I outlined by numbers myself, having to manage teams that were buried in Excel. And I'm an Excel guru myself, and I use it to do the Strategikon budget, for example, which may be fine, but it's not sustainable when you are dealing with very, very complex, multiple location, multiple cost drivers budgets, which are the budgets required for clinical study modeling. What we are seeing through the use of technology is substantial savings, and the savings take different forms. Of course, it's a saving of effort. We are looking at 50 to 80% savings in effort versus using traditional methods, and they are associated with all of the core activities: planning, procurement, and vendor management of clinical trials, and that is through the application of a transformative end-to-end digital standard that comes with process and data behind it. And of course, the other advantages, which are the harder to measure, which relate to job satisfaction, transparency, and stronger collaboration between sponsors and CROs. So I see my screen moving again. Okay, I wanted to call, okay, one more slide. So what is Clinical Maestro? We are a dual a platform solution. What you are looking at is our Pharma solution, which is composed of 4 modular applications under one platform. The applications integrate seamlessly, yet they can operate independently. And they cover all of the 4 pillars of the clinical operations vertical. Our solution, Clinical Maestro portfolio, it's really a very modern operational and budgeting planning solution that delivers consistently 90% accuracy in budgeting. It's being backed by intelligence data trove. It's algorithm driven, and it's fueling from intelligence that comes from our sourcing application Source. It's extremely fast. It really takes the time to create a budget and a scenario from hundreds of hours down to really minutes and clicks. It's been in production since Q4 of 2018, so it's almost 2 years now. We are being used by small companies, virtual biotechs, mid and large pharma, and it's really the industry flagship product now for planning and budgeting. Our sourcing application is the closest to my heart because that's where the journey started for us to a large extent. The desire to automate outsourcing by creating a fit for purpose dedicated solution for clinical trials. We all know that generic procurement solutions have very low penetration in pharma. And this is really because they're not fit for, it's the effort of designing a clinical RFP in a non-industry specific tool and putting a bid grid with maybe 100 cost drivers in, it's non-trivial and quite honestly discouraging. I personally tried to do that, and that frustration led to the creation of Source. It's really powerful tool because it creates an interface for bidding with distinct applications between service provider and CROs, increases collaboration to a whole different level, and mostly transparency, very supportive of remote working environment, and to me, it's a single source of truth, whether you are a global pharma with multiple locations around the world, or you have a small physical or virtual office working on one drug. The sourcing application brings everyone together in a truly powerful way, keeps a full record of your bidding history and creates your own bidding intelligence that ultimately fits back into our portfolio application. We just launched this week Clinical Maestro Lead. Very, very proud of that because it's a first application of its kind in the industry. So we are the pioneers here, really digitizing the reporting of actuals for accrual management purposes and the reforecasting of clinical trials based on either output and input. And we are working on change order management, and I saw change orders being high on the list of pandemic challenges. So hopefully our solution is going to ease many people's lives. In parallel, focusing on building our alliance and vendor management application vision. We already have a version of it in production under source, but we are looking at expanding it, looking at performance KPIs for contract and vendor management. So with that, I would like to call poll number 2. Okay, putting my glasses on again. So poll number 2, in which areas do you think digital transformation is most needed? So options are site feasibility, which is automating the manual questionnaires and the analysis of those manual questionnaires. Study planning, which is running the countless impact scenarios that are required and quickly evaluating impact. Study budgeting, which is getting fair market value quickly. Automating the outsourcing and getting out of the Excel side-by-side big grid analysis. Digitizing the change order, particularly on the reconciliation side, contract, a budget reporting, which relates to forecasting clinical trials, and finally managing vendors digitally through performance dashboards.
And I think I'll give 30 seconds. I see a lot of people selecting their options.
Your answers are very important to us in terms of our own strategic thinking and planning. So really thank you for providing the input.
I'll give it just 10 more seconds, ladies and gentlemen. Sure.
And Sam, how much time do I have? Because we started a bit late. I'm estimating about 7 minutes. Is that the case?
Yep, 7 minutes, 11:30, correct.
Okay, okay.
So we'll have a quick 10-minute break for everyone to grab a coffee, check up on their children, and resume again.
Hey, I'm well equipped right here.
Wonderful, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to end the poll.
Yep. Okay. Okay, so study budgeting still a major pain point, and I guess the second biggest would be study feasibility. Okay, well, thank you so much. My screen got stuck again. Not exactly sure what happens. I am in. Is there something, Sam, that you may be holding? Okay, got it. I'm gonna go back. Okay, so since I'm running on the last 7 minutes, the next discussion that I'd like to focus on is this digital revolution of clinical trials. And I was in a PCMG forum this morning talking about digital revolution. Heard Ronald's amazing speech about what's available in terms of technology. I was very impressed to hear that many pharma companies are actually taking very innovative approaches to actually creating digital strategy. Okay, I hope so. So what I wanted to talk to you about is some of the challenges we've been seeing on the infrastructure side during the COVID pandemic. It started with February, March, April, what we call crisis management, in which really I think there was non-critical, not effective patient safety very much went on hold. And trying to evaluate the situation and possible scenarios for moving forward. I think we are now into this adapting to new reality middle bucket. in which there is intensive planning, replanning, forecasting activities going on. This is really the midterm focus, why we are figuring out how to move towards this reinvention of clinical trials and the long-term investments in technology, sustainability, and overall embracing the change that the pandemic brought to our industry. In this time, we are seeing Clinical Maestro being really part of the survival kit, if you wish, during and post-pandemic, being really the only technology that is supporting clinical outsourcing individuals cope with this new reality. On the point of planning and reforecasting, pharma companies, they were just not equipped to face this challenge of planning and scenario analysis. And as we've been suffering through layoffs and in general, understaffed outsourcing department, the ability to plan budget quickly and reliably, it's really part of survival on a day-to-day basis during this period, and for surely much beyond. On the rapid restart of studies that are currently on hold, again, our sourcing application it's really becoming the flagship for fast sourcing and due diligence, especially because the due diligence engine enables stronger and more transparent negotiations with service providers, which automatically lowers the cost of the services. And the long-term focus on sustainability has to do with visibility into data mining, streamlining workflows, and being able to use technology that supports decision-making in real time. I'm going to skip the clinical operations digital journey since our time is quite limited and just focus on the license investment ROI. The advantage of using technology on the infrastructure side of clinical trials goes beyond just the savings of time and cost. It is a great contributor to having happier teams, producing analytics with significantly less pain. We hear from our customers who are telling us that they spend less time trying to assemble the data so they can do analysis and run out of time doing the analysis. Now the technology is enabling them to align data very quickly, so the focus is actually on analysis, not paralyzed in getting to the analysis. The intelligence is very important. It's really critical to know where you are on your clinical trial, when do you expect a change order, what does a forecast look like. We're seeing this through our lead application that keeps the temperature on the existing clinical trials rollout from a contract management perspective and a change order anticipation perspective. And of course, the compliance is enforced at a whole different level. I'll tell you, just on the outsourcing documents alone, the fact that you have to receive emails with 50 attachments, save them, and file them, and have your entire bidding history at your fingertips keeps you compliant with your own vendor selection SOPs, and further gets you ready for inspections. And of course, at the end of the day, the sponsors want control over decision-making, and the control comes from knowledge, and knowledge comes from information. And what we do is enable the information management at the level for clinical infrastructure and business operation that has never been attained before. So I'd like to finish with this futuristic image that it's meant to show service provider and the sponsor working together on this digital map, looking transparently on what's going on, and we do so through our transaction room, and seeing amazing results in terms of savings. We completed recently a clinical study for a company running a phase 3 global trial, which was quite large in scale. And by using our technology to can run scenarios for this trial pre-RFP, then run a digital RFP through multiple runs of bidding, ending up saving 25% of the total cost. And they did so in 75% less time. So it's not only the cost, it's the time and the satisfaction and the bringing together that warms our heart, and that it's bringing a new angle to technology transformation in clinical trials. Of course, the goal is to work in concert, and the concert is a well-chosen word for Clinical Maestro. What we are seeing and we are moving towards is pharma companies and service providers working in tandem. Pharma companies planning their pipeline, conduct RFPs, managing budgets, and service providers transparently submitting bids and providing forecasts, and managing third parties in a way that is highly fluid and transparent for the industry. So with this, I know I am right at the top of the hour. Apologize for the technical disruptions. And if we still have time, I would love to take a question or two.
So we do have 2 questions from the audience. The first one's from Ronald. He said,
Okay.
Great presentation, thank you. And he asked, how do you see the clinical trial field developing over the next 5 years? What kind of AI technology companies do you think will have the biggest impact?
I see a continuum of technologies emerging across different verticals. We've seen emergence of technologies at the beginning for data capture and data management. Then a whole other vertical around CTMS-like applications. A whole vertical looking on document management and inspection readiness and quality around eTMF-like solutions. And now new verticals that have to do with wearables, with protocol optimization. And in our case, we are using on the outsourcing data set, which is really not mined from an AI perspective because the data has never been collected at the scale that AI and ML can be used. So I see all of these verticals working in tandem, generating different types of data, and inherently creating different types of data silos, but ultimately maturing to extract only the value data, which may be just a layer of analytics that are supportive of decision making. To me, it's you are going from an overload when you get your phone, the iPhone for the first time, and you keep buying apps. But then in the end, you end up using 4 or 5. Maybe not the best analogy, but the way I see AI being successful is being applied where the data is collected clean and consistently. And I'm very hopeful because we are collecting such an interesting data set in Maestro. We have a blend of operational data with cost data, regulatory data, timeline data, and geographical data that is coming from bids and contracts and sourcing activity. And it's bringing the business intelligence for clinical trials to a level that, as I said before, has never been achieved. So I think AI is going to thrive, not yet on our data set. It's still dirty. But over time is going to mature across all of these verticals, and then probably we'll need new layers to combine the findings across the different verticals as well. So I'm very positive about what's happening in the industry, but it takes adoption. We need to be able to apply technologies to reap the effects of it, of technology.
Wonderful. And the last question we received from the audience is, how accurate is your clinical Maestro, and how does the data remain current?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the data currency is driven by intelligence, because we have the ability to source, and we have agreements with the sponsors to give us access to blinded data. The data is always current. So we apply intelligence and predictive analytics on the sourcing data, in which we are injecting in the planning. This is quite different from how data was collected before. But at the same time, similar to, for example, site cost data, which has been for years acquired through redacted Excel spreadsheets and some human entering it into a database. Now we just brought the same concept to a different level through the sourcing automation. So we are extremely accurate. We've been seeing 95% accuracy. The 5% variance is plus or minus versus awarded budget. And we've seen this across all categories of trials. Well, then I would like to thank you. Please look us up to show what we can do. And again, as an outsourcing professional, I feel very proud that we actually can deliver a tool that I could buy instead of always buying for the clinical teams or data management teams. So it's a very exciting time for us, and I believe for the industry overall. Thank you.